So that meditation was just for your ears. It's now gone in cyberspace. Okay, so here's the mandala offering. Sashi Bugi Juje Medota, Rira Legend in the Gambadi, Sange Shindu Meda Uwagi, Dobu Nanda Jinga Chubajo, Idon Guru Rana Mandala Kamneya Dayami. Sangye Chudan Sogi Jonam Na, Jaju Badu Dani Gazu Jia, Dagi Juje Gebe Sunangi, Dola Beje Sange Dubasho. Sangye Chudan Sogi Jonam Na, Jaju Badu Dani Gazu Jia, Dagi Juje Gebe Sunangi, Dola Beje Sange Dubasho. Sangye Chudan Sogi Jonama, Jaju Badu Dani Gazu Jia, Dagi Juje Gebe Sunangi, Dola Beje Sange Dubasho. So why 3 times? Your questions are going to stay with me until I get them answered. So, good questions.
I always thought it was because you were paying homage to the Buddha and to your group, the Sangha, whatever that encompasses. And, you know,
That occurred to
just
me.
like the prayer was saying, that, so you do
That
it 3 times to pay homage to each thing. That's how I looked at it, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I think you're probably right, Sharon, and that's how I thought of it too. But then I thought, well, it might be to Buddha's body, speech, mind. um,
And
well,
three is a big number in Buddhism too. Three is
yeah,
big, 108. So
it is. It is. Um, by the way, some of you know, and maybe some of you don't, but we're going to start doing some more informal kinds of meditations at our house. We figured that since kind of everything in our world has gone crazy, that particularly in the area where we live in DC, there's a lot of anxiety and insecurity and uncertainty. And so we're starting what we're calling safe place group meditations. And I'll try to keep a more secular format to the meditations, but um, folks are welcome to join. If you want to be part of that, just shoot me an email. And for people who live close, we're encouraging people to come to our house. And for people who live far away, we'll have a Zoom link where you can join remotely. All right. So we left off with these verses from Nagarjuna, which are kind of Nagarjuna's view of the world. Essenceless, like a plantain tree, resembling a fairy city. Oh, actually, this verse, we spent some time on it. It actually starts with verse 26. With no basis and no perceptual object, with no root and no foundation, totally arisen from the cause, misknowledge, bereft of beginning, middle, and end, essenceless like a plantain tree, resembling a fairy city, in an unbearable city of confusion, life appears like an illusion. And so that's where we spent some time last time. Just in review, these first four um, attributes, no basis, no perceptual object, no root, and no foundation, are in Tibetan um, neme, which is no basis. And what that is we have, Buddha talked about what's called the 18 dhatus. And we talked about this a little last time. Those really dhatu is like a realm or an experience, realms of experience, if you will. And so we have our eye faculty, we have sights, and then we have cognitions of sights. Those are three of the dhatus. Same with the ear. We have the ear faculty, what it perceives, and the cognition of those sounds, another three. We have the nose faculty, smells, perception of smell. Those are three more dhatus. We have a tongue. We have taste, perception of taste. Those are three more dhatus. We have tangible things. We have our body faculty, which can feel tangible things. And then we have cognition of tangible things. That's three more, making 15 dhatus. And then we have our mind faculty, cognition of different things that appear to the mind, and awareness of those cognitions. And those are the three last dhatus, making 18 dhatus. And so in a way, the whole world comes down to those 18 realms of experience. Everything we know, everything we can perceive, everything that appears comes down to those realms of experience. And so what Nagarjuna is saying, the first one, no basis, in Tibetan, that's ne me, no basis. That's talking about what's called in Tibetan dakin, the empowering condition. The empowering condition is a sense faculty that's capable of perception. Like in the case of color or form, that would be our eye faculty, right? And so when you analyze the eye faculty, you can see that it doesn't exist on its own. It has lots of causes and conditions, too many. If you're into medicine at all and you study what goes into our eye being able to see, it's really mind-boggling, all the different factors and conditions that have to come together for vision to occur. So there's no true basis to it in terms of, like, for instance, when somebody dies, everything that goes into being an eye eventually deteriorates into dust, and there's nothing there, right? And so it has no true nature to it. So that's the first thing that has no basis, the faculties of perception, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and then the mind faculty. And then the second word in this verse, no perceptual objects, that's called the mikin, or the object condition. And so that's like for the eye faculty to function, we have to have a color and shape appear to it and light, right? And so that's the mikin. Or for our ears to function in perceiving sound, we have to have a sound. Or for our nose to function in perceiving smell, we have to have an external smell of some kind. So those are called the mikin. And again, when you analyze those appearing objects, they also don't have any real nature to them. And so in that way, they have no inherent substantial basis to them. And then no root is talking about what's called in Tibetan demakatkin, the immediately preceding condition that gives rise to the awareness. So in the case of let's say, a visual perception, we have to have a consciousness capable of connecting with the eye faculty as it perceives a shape and a color. So that's the immediately preceding condition for a cognition of the color to occur. In the case of our mind faculty, before a moment of cognitive perception, the immediately preceding condition must be a previous moment of mind that's activated to perceive whatever appears to it. And so Nagarjuna is saying that there's no root to that, which means those immediately preceding conditions also have a whole causal nexus. And so they don't exist on their own either. Right? So, so there's no root, there's no basis, there's no perceptual logic, there's no root to these perceptions. And therefore, his fourth point, there's no foundation. Um, in Tibetan, that's Tawame. They're rootless, means that there's, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. That's the previous one. No foundation in Tibetan is Nepame, which is there's no real foundation, or ignorance produces the notion that things are real, um, and that they have diverse natures. And so it's that ignorance that imputes a self nature into the perceptions, but the perceptions themselves have no real inherent nature to them. I see Ani Karuna. Yeah, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry. So could you go over the last one again with like maybe sound or something? I still don't understand because this is the way we perceive. Are you
Yeah,
you're going through the way we actually
yeah,
realize that we're hearing something?
yeah. So which one are you wanting to know, the rootless or the no foundation?
Oh, oh, I thought, oh, so that's the same thing? I mean, that's not the same thing?
No, the no root is talking about, it's a philosophical term, dematakyan, the immediately preceding condition.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to.
Okay, so like in, let's say, sound, you have functioning ear faculty, that's the sense power, which is called the dakyan. And then you have a sound that's coming into the ear, that's the appearing condition, the mikyan. And then the third thing you need is a auditory consciousness capable of, um, through that ear faculty, of being able to perceive the sound. That's
Oh,
the immediately
and that's
perceived.
what they call a root? That's what,
Um, right.
okay.
But it's rootless because that also is dependent and has no self nature to it. And so it's rootless. But
Thank you.
in a conventional context, we can say, yeah, there's the auditory awareness. I mean, everybody knows we have an auditory awareness, right? You have to, or you wouldn't hear anything, right? And if you didn't have the ear faculty, you wouldn't be able to hear anything. And if you didn't have sounds appearing to it, you wouldn't be able to hear anything. But what's happening here is Nagarjuna is really analyzing each of those spheres of experiencing and saying that there's no substantial inherent quality to them.
And
Or
then, sorry.
go ahead.
And then the foundation was then all three of them together or?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so in other words, everything that we can experience about the world or say about the world has come through those 18 dhatus. And since they all have no inherent nature to them, there's no foundation for our ascribing inherent nature to the world.
So then what do we do? Well, we're not at that point, so no need to answer. I mean,
Well,
you might be. I'm
it's a really what happens, my understanding of what happens to enlightened beings is they get so deep into that debunking of the misknowledge that wrongly imputes self-nature into things. They get so deep into the wisdom that can see that that's false, that the mind goes one pointedly into the absence of self-nature in all things. So a Buddha can perceive the arising of appearances, and they can perceive the color blue or hear a sound, but they don't have the misknowledge that ascribes self-nature to that phenomena.
Well
Because
said. Thank you very much.
their
Very
mind
clear.
one pointedly focused on the absence of self-nature in everything.
Well, because sometimes you wonder if they do have senses. Because you know.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was very clear.
Until we become a Buddha, what happens in practice is the bodhisattva or the aspirant who's trying to see through these deceptive appearances. When they're in one-pointed meditation, that's when they're capable of seeing the lack of self-nature. And at that point, no appearances come to their mind. It's a one-pointed absorption into the emptiness of self-nature. And so when they come out of the meditation, then their sensory perceptions come back. But the sensory perceptions, they know because of their experience in meditation that they're deceptive. And so they appear illusory like. But they go back and forth between meditation on emptiness and then the post-meditation where the illusory appearances are appearing to them, but they're not fooled by those illusory appearances. And it's not until they work through the subtle obstacles to omniscience that they can see both the emptiness of things as well as their relative appearance at the same time. There's no dichotomy. So it's a journey.
Cool. Thank you.
So meanwhile, for that kind of enlightened being, or a being getting close to that state of full enlightenment, everything, all those things seem essenceless, like a plantain tree, like a fairy city. I talked about this last time. I think maybe a better word for that would be a phantom city. Unbearable city of confusion is a very accurate translation. And if you look at the world, it really is unbearable. I mean, the horror, I think that's partly what's causing all our societal unrest is with the internet and with social media and everybody being able to see in almost real time all the tragedies and horror happening around the world. I think a lot of people are getting overwhelmed by it. But of course, an enlightened being has been seeing this ongoing train wreck of existence all along. All right, which brings us to the next verse. How can the worldly, I'm sorry, 28. What is proclaimed as truth in this world by Brahma, the creator, and others was declared false for the noble ones. What else remains that is otherwise? So, Buddha, as far as I know, in terms of major world religions, Buddha was the only founder of a major world religion who said that everything is dependent arising, nothing has any essential nature. Other doctrines will say there's a God who created everything, or even if you're anti-religious and you're atheist, there's a sense of real dependent arising happening in science, that the world was caused by this and that, and then the Big Bang occurred, and there's still an objectifying of phenomena. So it was only the Buddha that declared that everything in this world is deceptive, is arising deceptively. So that's a big proclamation. Um, there 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 are two ways that you can be defined as Buddhist. One is when you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that's one way you say I'm Buddhist, because that's what I have trust in and that's what I follow. Another way you can become thought of as a Buddhist is when you're not buying in to four deceptive perspectives that the world has. They're called the four seals. Buddha called them the four seals that Buddhists realize. One is all conditioned things are impermanent. The second one is that all impure things are the nature of suffering. That word impure in Sanskrit is um, kusala, kusala, I think. In Tibetan, it's sakche. What does contaminated mean? It means contaminated by misknowledge or ignorance and afflictive states of mind. So anything contaminated by ignorance and that imputes self-nature to it, and lack of knowledge of karma to it, and anything contaminated by afflictions that arise out of that state of mind are the nature of suffering. So that's the second seal. The third seal, all dharmas are devoid of self. So all dharmas means all phenomena lack self-nature. And the fourth seal is only nirvana is peace. So that leads us to the next verse. How can the worldly, blinded by misknowledge, who follow the flow of their cravings, and the virtuous ones, who are skilled and free of craving, be viewed as equal? So Nagarjuna is setting up a dichotomy. You're going to hear all these prophets and sages from various traditions who have different ways that they see the world, right? And some will say, yeah, things truly exist. And then you have Buddha saying something completely different. And so Nagarjuna is saying, how can you compare the two? The Buddha, in a Buddhist point of view, completely transcended worldly views and completely saw beyond misknowledge and saw things as they are. Buddha compared a worldly person's view, and in a worldly view, people see the opposite of those four seals I just mentioned. They think, oh, I'm going to live forever. And I've seen people think this way, even at their very late years, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to live past 100 and I'll never die. And then a sense of like greed. You'll see this when you see somebody really greedy, thinking hoarding wealth is like that's like the best thing in the world because I'm going to be the richest person in the world. And so even though they're totally under the sway of their desire and craving and misknowledge, they're thinking they're making themselves happy at everybody else's expense, but they're creating untold suffering for their future lives. So that's the other worldly view, that I'm going to get the best of whatever partners I want, whatever money there is, whatever housing there is, whatever food there is, and that kind of thought. And then within that view, people who have that kind of mindset and a worldly mindset think of themselves as like really there. And you'll hear people say this. You gotta know who you are. You gotta assert yourself. You gotta, right? And there's a sense of me and mine, and it's very strong. And you'll find this really in people who get violent. If anything gets in the way between them and what they want, they get enraged and they try to destroy whoever or whatever is in their way. We're seeing this in high levels of government right now. And so for such a being, nirvana seems absurd. Why would I want to get rid of my mental afflictions? Why would I want to see things the way the Buddha saw them, right? It seems like far away or distant. So Buddha is like the opposite. Going in a Buddhist direction is like the opposite of the way of the world. Okay. So looking at my notes from Gyumi Khenser and Vishay. All right. Well, and part of that, realizing this, is to look at the difference between somebody like Gyumi Khenser Rinpoche or His Holiness the Dalai Lama and how they live, and how people who who are really worldly live. And it's just like night and day. It's very different. So, to seekers of reality, at first, you should declare everything exists. Once they understand things and grow detached, then you may teach them freedom. So I mentioned this several times that, and I'll get into the Tibetan here so you can see how this reads in Tibetan. I mentioned that if somebody misunderstands what we're talking about, it can be really dangerous for them. And so Nagarjuna is going to make that point now. Basically, when this doctrine that I just described in the verses that Nagarjuna said about the world being like a phantom city and like an unbearable city of confusion and having no essence to it, when lower schools of Buddhism heard this, they got very frightened. And they retorted, well, why did Buddha teach the Four Noble Truths and say they exist? Why did the Buddha teach the 18 dhatus and that they exist, and the 12 ayatanas? And, if you're saying they don't exist, right? And that's not what Nagarjuna is saying. He's not saying they don't exist. He's saying that they are essenceless. To understand that, you kind of have to understand where this whole argument came from in ancient Indian philosophy, and you'll see it also in Western psychology and Western philosophy. In Western religion, we talk about a soul, and there's a similar concept in Hinduism called Atman. Little different idea about it. In the Western concept, our souls were given us by God. So there's a greater force that created heaven and earth and created our souls. And they'll call it your immortal soul. And then say you'll burn in damnation if you don't follow the scriptures exactly right. And so that's kind of the typical take on it in Western religions. You'll see similar things in other religions. But in Hinduism, in ancient Indian philosophy, the idea of Atman was this part of us that continues after death. It goes from birth to rebirth to rebirth. And there's a sense that there's an essence there that exists from its own side and isn't dependent on anything, that's indestructible. So, that's the thing that Nagarjuna is taking aim at and saying, how could that be, right? And And he's using these different verses to kind of take apart that argument. So he's not saying nothing exists. What he's saying is that nothing exists on its own. Everything depends on something else. And therefore, there's no essential nature there. You can't pinpoint this essence of Wilson that came from a previous life and will go into the next life, because the concept of Wilson depends on many causes and conditions that have come together and are abiding for now, but will soon dissipate. What will go forward in the Buddhist view is a continuum based on that collection that's now called Wilson. What form that continuum will take depends entirely on what causes and conditions have been brought to bear in my life and what kind of external causes and conditions will be encountered as I go forward. So there will be a whole new reshaping of this continuum of Wilson based on my karma. And that's why in Buddhism, it's so essential to watch your karma, to mind your karma, because that's defining what we're becoming. And we have some influence on that. That's something we can actually control a little bit. So in this verse, find the previous verse. Okay. Okay, so what remains otherwise was the previous verse. So here, Denyi means that, and Sul means method, to that method. Dokmar, in the beginning, Damshe Yu means everything exists. Che, Chibaja means we're described as existence. So this is a response to those lower schools of Buddhism said that why did Buddha teach the Four Noble Truths and why did Buddha teach the 18 dhatus? If you're saying they don't exist, how come he taught them? And so the response from Nagarjuna was saying at the beginning, for beginners, he taught the Four Noble Truths as really existing. He taught the dhatus as really existing. And the example is Buddha would say, yeah, I am accepting this offering. He would use the relative terms I in a word like this offering, or I'm walking, because in a relative way, those are true. And so he's not lying when he teaches the Four Noble Truths exist. They're real. Yes, there really is suffering in the world. Yes, that suffering comes from causes and conditions, our afflictions and our karmic actions. Yes, that suffering can end. And yes, there's a pathway to that suffering. That's all true in a relative way. The 18 dhatus that I already mentioned of our sensory perception and mental perception, those all exist in a relative way. So he taught those so that at the beginning, people who don't understand what's happening in terms of where they come from or where they're going, and they just want to be free of suffering, they get a sense of, the Buddha said that all suffering comes from karma and afflictions, and that we're on a cycle of existence where we die and get reborn again based on our karma. And as somebody contemplates that, what happens is they start to get mature. They start to think, I need to be careful about what karmic actions I enter into. I need to be more virtuous. I need to start learning how to meditate and control my mind. I need to become unaddicted to the pleasures of this cyclic life. And as that happens, they start to get closer to achieving true renunciation. Once they get more mature and they get renunciation and bodhicitta, then they are ripe to be told these teachings, which actually liberate them from that cycle of becoming. Why? Why do these teachings liberate them from that cycle of becoming? What is it about these teachings? And that's where I forgot to open this at the beginning of class, and I should have. Hold on. But I'll open it now because it's good to have a visual. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is, our old friend, the wheel of life. Here it is, right? That's where we're living. And so if you look at this particular image, as I said, around the edge of this, that monster represents our impermanent nature. Anything that's created by causes and conditions eventually will disintegrate, and that's our nature, right? And then in the hub are the different realms we get born in, and in the hub of that, the two types of intermediate state that beings go through, either going down in existence or going up in existence. And then at the very hub, the three poisons of mind that keep us trapped here: ignorance, and from ignorance comes hatred and desire. And that makes the whole wheel go round. At the outer rim are the 12 nidanas, the 12 links that cause us to just whirl in this round of existence. And the very first one is a blind man with a cane, right? That's our ignorance, the misknowledge that Nagarjuna was talking about. When we're blinded by thinking things have true nature and imputing true nature onto things and clinging to a me and a mine and creating actions with our body, speech, and mind, we create this second link of karma. There's the potter creating things out of clay. And then those karmas we carry forward in our continuum. This monkey is eating fruit while it drops seeds on the ground. Everywhere they fall, then new plants start. That's our consciousness carrying those karmic seeds into our next life. And here's a canoe with 4 passengers representing name and form, our body and our 4 mental aggregates of the new life. And then the forming of sense powers and their objects, their consciousness, the ayatanas that generate perception, then contact between the objects of perception and the consciousness. Then feeling arises, then initial craving, then strong craving, and that leads to birth. To becoming, to birth. And when there's birth, there's death. So all of that is dependent. And this, as I explained before, these nidanas take either 2 or 3 lives for all of them for initial karma to get ripened into a mature karma and then to give a whole life. So all of that started here with the blind man, with the cane. The cane shows that it's unfirm. And the problem with misknowledge, with ignorance, is that it's not really the way things are. And that's just like if you knock out a cane from somebody who needs one, they'll fall. Similarly, if you knock out the supports of ignorance, it'll fall. It's not real. It's not how things really are in their ultimate way of being. So if we are able to do that and replace the ignorance that we've carried from beginningless time with wisdom that perceives how things really are, then we stop giving rise to the second link of karmic formation. And if we're not giving rise to karmic formation, then we're not carrying those karmic seeds forward into a future life. And if we're not carrying those karmic seeds forward, then all the other links stop occurring. And at that point, our minds are free. And that's how we stop that cycle of existence. So anyway, that's what I believe Nagarjuna is saying in this verse. The seekers of reality, at first, you should declare everything exists. When those teachings on the four truths and the 18 dhatus and the 12 ayatanas, when those cause the person to develop a revulsion for cyclic existence and an intent to get out of it, and even better if they develop bodhicitta and the wish to free all beings, then that matures them to the point that then Buddha can teach these teachings on emptiness to actually liberate their minds from that ignorance, which is the starting place of the chain of dependent arising. And if that can be eliminated, then their suffering will break down, and the cause of their suffering will break down. Once they understand things and grow detached, then you may teach them freedom. And so that's when the time is to teach freedom. The danger of teaching it too soon is that, let's say you start with the beginner and you say, well, things lack true nature. And then the beginner doesn't understand that properly and thinks, well, so there's really no karma and I don't really have to worry about rebirth. If they get that idea, their mind falls into nihilism. And that nihilistic idea cuts out the root of their path. And in fact, it really hurts them. And it creates a really negative karma for the teacher who teaches it that way too soon. So
Actually, Wilson,
yeah.
I've heard Westerners discuss Buddhism, not even particularly Tibetan Buddhism, and they talk about, how crazy it is that life is an illusion. I mean, they have no clue. And that's pretty much what you're saying. If you're trying to tell people that without all the information, it just seems crazy to them.
Yeah. And I think I've told you before, but when my reality rub-in with this was when I just got out of college. I'd been introduced to Buddhism by Lama Yeshe, and then I had the good fortune of meeting Serme Khensa Rinpoche in New Jersey, and so I started hearing authentic teachings, at that point. But one winter, my first winter back from college, in fact, there was a huge snowstorm. And I read in the paper this article about a real horrible tragedy. A woman had killed her child. She had stabbed her child to death. And when the police came across the tragedy and they asked what had happened, her response, well, was nothing exists anyway. And it was that nihilistic view that was kind of floating around, and it still apparently is floating around. And it's really toxic. It's like poison. And it's not how things are. Things do exist in a relative way. They don't have an essential nature to them because they're all dependently arisen. And so you really have to understand that fine point, but it's a very important point. And the listener has to be prepared by the paths in common so that they can develop renunciation, they can develop a sense of right and wrong, of how to create positive karma and avoid negative karma, sense of refuge, and hopefully a sense of bodhicitta. And if they're solid in those paths in common, then it's time to teach them how to be free. Because then there's less danger of the mind falling into nihilism. Particularly if you teach them about emptiness through starting with dependent origination, so they understand that. All right, so I think we have time for one more verse. Um, In his commentary to this, Gyime Khyentse Rinpoche, when he was teaching this, he talked a little bit about Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which are two famous Tibetan traditions for realizing the emptiness of the mind. And where they agree, those schools of thought, they agree on the importance of getting in touch with the clear nature of the mind and dwelling there. And you'll find this also if you read Zen texts. There's a big emphasis on getting in touch and staying with the clear nature of the mind. Gelugpas agree with that. There's a famous text by the first Panchen Lama, the Ganden oral tradition of Mahamudra, in which it starts out talking about the same points of how to purify the mind so you get in touch with its clear light nature and you dwell in that awareness, the way we did at the beginning of this class for a little while with meditation. However, Losam Chugi Gyaltsen made a really emphatic point that that's only the beginning. Once you get in touch with that clear light nature of the mind, you have to use your analysis to debunk the misperceptions of self, both the misperceptions of the self nature to the mind as well as to the aggregates, to actually start cutting through the misknowledge that causes the cycle of suffering. And so, anyway, it's important. That's why there's so much emphasis on studying the philosophical texts on correct view. Which brings us to verse 31, the importance of not teaching this doctrine to somebody at the beginning until they have kind of a foundation in the other paths in common in Buddhism. Ignorant of the meaning of freedom, just acting on what they have heard. Let me go up here. They neglect the exercise of virtue. Such pitiful creatures are lost. And so that's exactly getting to what I was talking about before when somebody errs on the side of nihilistic interpretations of the doctrine of emptiness. And I'll hear this, I've heard this leveled many times by also scholars of other religious traditions. When I've heard people say Nagarjuna was nihilistic, and he's not. That's a misnomer. Usually that's because I think people don't understand the object of negation. That's the object that Nagarjuna is debunking. And that object is grasping at a self-existent me, a self-existent mind. Those are false perceptions because there is nothing that arises without arising dependently. So nothing exists on its own. People who don't understand the fine point there, as I said, can fall into nihilism where they start thinking that karma won't give effects and things like that. And such beings are really lost. They end up neglecting their virtuous activities, and they can fall very quickly into kind of depraved behavior and end up in a worse situation than before they heard you teach. So, you don't want
I
to.
have a question.
Yeah,
Um, doesn't practicing bodhicitta when you're not in a really meditative state, does that not help insulate you from wrong views and, you know, wrong actions and, that kind of stuff too?
yeah.
I mean, that
It,
that is a real compliment, right? To the practice of clear light and all that stuff.
yeah, bodhicitta is considered an essential feature from a Mahayana point of view. If you don't have bodhicitta and you enter in, even if you have right view, and Nagarjuna acknowledges that some people in lower paths reach nirvana because they end up with a correct view of emptiness, but they can't reach full Buddhahood, full enlightenment without the bodhicitta. And so bodhicitta is like the mainstay of the Mahayana path. And there's so many benefits.
Yeah, I just view it as part of my armor, if that makes
Yes,
any sense. I mean,
yeah,
it's my fallback place. If nothing else, I can't make sense of, that's kind of where I go.
you can't go wrong with bodhicitta. If you develop even an artificial bodhicitta, you are on the right path. Right? Um, and that's why in some ceremonies, His Holiness likes to do a ceremony that's drawn from Vajrayana practices when he's teaching public discourses. And when he gets through the teachings on how to develop bodhicitta, he has people picture it as a moon cushion in their heart. And so that's kind of a visual form that they can imagine their bodhicitta takes.
I've seen other teachers do that too. That's important. Yeah.
And then he takes the teachings on wisdom and how to develop insight into dependent arising and emptiness, and he has people imagine that as a Vajra standing on that moon cushion. And really what that symbolizes is the two bodhicittas, relative bodhicitta of I want to become enlightened to liberate all beings from suffering, and absolute bodhicitta, seeing the reality of dependent arising and emptiness correctly. And if you have those two factors in your heart, you won't go wrong, right? You need a correct view of emptiness that supports the teachings on karma and how karma arises and how virtuous karma is really necessary on the path to make progress. If you have it correct in your mind, you won't fall. So I think I'll stop there. And we'll come back to this next time. Okay. Sashi Bugi Juche Medo Dran Rira Linjin Yende Gemba Dia Sange Jindu Meda Wagi Dogu Nanda Jinga Juba Jo Idam Guru Rada Mandala Kamne Yatayami Gewa De Gewo Kon Sunam Yeje Zozo Jin Sunam Yeje Lejun Dambo Kuni Doba Jo Yonju Zenjo Rinpoche, Amage Banange Geji, Geba Nyamba Mepa Yang, Gone Gondu Bawa Sho, Gari Rawe Goe, Chingande, Abandon Dawa, Malu Jungwe Ne, Genrezi Wan Denzen Yazo Ye, Chebesi De Badu Tengyu Chi. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say it's nice to see you, Sharon. We don't often get to see you in person.
I decided to come out of the darkness.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So
That's
Thank you,
wonderful.
Wilson.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Wilson.
Long
Take care.
life.
That was
Love you.
lovely.
Thank you.
Stay
Yeah,
healthy,
lovely.
everybody. Okay.
Lovely.